Hey guys, welcome back to another Dragon's Defense devlog. I'm pretty excited to show you what I've got in store for this devlog. However, before we get right into it, to those of you who are not aware of this game, Dragon's Defense, is a tower defense that you can participate in. What I mean by that is, although there's a bunch of placeables that you can put down to help you defend your castle, you, the player, can also participate in defending your castle from the waves of enemies. If you want more details on my game, you can go back to my last video. In fact, it's the very first video that I made on Dragon's Defense. You'll find more details there on the gameplay. But before we dive right into the meat of the devlog, there is a bit of bad news that I have to share regarding the development of this game. So recently, I was pretty much unemployed. In fact, I was employed. So I spent pretty much a lot of my free time developing this game, as well as doing job applications. So I had a lot of time to develop all sorts of features for this game. However, recently I did find a job, which is good news for me, but bad news for this development of the game. So the development of the game won't be as efficient, you could say, as previously. I'll definitely have way less free time than before. So major devlogs like this will become more infrequent, but I am very close to finishing the programming side of this game, so we will just have to see in the future. Now with the bad news out of the way, let's start getting into the devlog. And of course, as a little disclaimer, nothing here you see is final. Everything is just a placeholder, as well as functionality for certain characters might change. Now without further ado, let's get right into the details.
Everybody is here!
You heard that right. All the characters that I planned for this game have now been implemented. So that means all the enemies, all the traps, and all the sentients. And I'll be going into detail on each of these characters that I've implemented. First, let's start with the enemies. So there are 11 special enemies. So let's start with the shinobi. The shinobi is a pretty straightforward one. It's an enemy that is undetectable by sentients. So be careful when the shinobi does come into the battlefield. Next, we have the familiar, which is the opposite of the shinobi, where they are undetected by traps. However, they can still be affected by the trap if another enemy that is detectable by traps activates that trap and is able to damage the familiar if it is in range. Next, we have the Dark Knight, which is an enemy that focuses more on attacking any placeables you have. So your placeables aren't entirely safe from these enemies. Speaking of placeables not being entirely safe, there is the Trapper, and the Trapper is a special kind of enemy because it moves horizontally across your screen instead of down your screen. The Trapper doesn't focus on damaging your castle per se, but instead focuses on damaging your placeables. Essentially, it places down barrels wherever it runs, and if not diffused in time, will explode, severely damaging any placeables in range. Now, how might you defuse it? Well, you can actually click on the explosive a few times, and eventually it will be disarmed, and you have nothing else to worry about. So be careful when these guys come out. And on the topic of enemies that move horizontally, we have the golden enemy. The golden enemy is a very rare spawn, and these enemies are undetectable by sentients or traps. You as a player have to focus all your attention on the golden enemy in hopes of killing it, and if you do kill the golden enemy, you will get lots and lots of souls. However, this would mean abandoning your duty in defending the castle, so choose wisely if you want to kill the golden enemy or not. Next up, we have the illusionist. The illusionist is an enemy that walks towards a castle but in a sort of curvy pattern that would throw off your aim as well as any of the Sentients' aim. So it's not guaranteed that the Sentients can hit the illusionist. Next up, we have the Trojan. The Trojan is a giant enemy that walks very slowly towards your castle, and it doesn't really do anything out of the ordinary from first glance. However, if it is killed, or if it is near your castle enough, it will explode into smaller enemies. And depending on how close they are to the castle, it could be a very devastating blow. Next is the Mage Sniper. The Mage Sniper walks into the battlefield for a brief moment, and then stops and takes aim at a placeable that is furthest away from him. He takes a while to set up, but when he's fully finished, he will shoot at that target, severely damaging any placeables in the way, as it is shooting a penetrative projectile. The Mage Snipers are undetectable by Sentients for the first few seconds, but after that, it is detectable. So it would be in the player's best interest to focus fire on the Mage Sniper before they are able to take aim on the placeables. This next enemy is an enemy that can easily turn the tides of the war if you are not careful, and this is the Tinker. The Tinker is an enemy that can essentially turn sentients and traps against you through an evil aura that is surrounding them. Whenever a sentient is converted to evil, the sentients will start shooting friendly sentients and traps. If you want to avoid any placeables from dying, you have to quickly sell the evil sentient. However, evil sentients are worthless. When it comes to traps that turn into evil though, any kind of trap will end up exploding from malfunctioning, killing any placeables in the vicinity. And if they are near enough to your castle, it will damage you as well. Again, to prevent this explosion from happening, you have to sell the evil trap. But, as I previously stated, evil placeables are worthless. So you better watch out when the Tinker comes to the battlefield. Finally, we arrive to the last two enemies. And these two enemies aren't just any other ordinary enemy. They are enemies that can alter the battlefield. Let's start with the Crater Creator. The Crater Creator leaves behind a trail of void wherever they walk, and this void area is an area that cannot be placed upon. Additionally, anything it touches will be killed instantly. So it is very important that whenever you see the Crater Creator, you focus fire. Last but not least, we got the Disruptor. The Disruptor is a special type of enemy where they are unkillable, but they only serve one purpose. That purpose is, at the beginning of a wave, they walk onto the battlefield for a brief second and then create an area that is unplaceable, and then they leave the battlefield. They cannot be stopped in any way. However, there is some preparation for the Disruptor. You are alerted if the Disruptor will come in the next wave, and you will also be shown a preview of what area will be affected. So you must plan accordingly around this area. And those are all the enemies that will be in the game. Of course, I didn't mention the basic enemies, I only mentioned the special variants in this game. We are not done here though. We still have some sentients to talk about. There are 11 sentients, similar to the amount of enemies. We'll start with the Archer. The Archer is pretty much the most basic unit in the game. Its stats are pretty much normal in everything. The Archer serves as a baseline for what is normal. Next, we got the White Knight, the counterpart to the Dark Knight. The White Knight is a sentient that only attacks what is nearby. It has a very short attack radius. However, it makes up for it for having high damage and high health. Next is the Ice Mage. The Ice Mage casts projectiles that slightly slows down the enemies. However, this effect can stack, so if you focus fire on one enemy, it'll really slow him down. Of course, this debuff is quite powerful, however, the Ice Mage lacks in damage. The next sentient on our list is the Demo Mage. The Demo Mage casts explosive magic and severely damages any enemies that are in the blast radius if the shot is landed. Due to this powerful magic, The Demo Mage can only cast this explosive magic every so often. Next, we have arguably the most powerful sentient on this list, the Dragonkin. The Dragonkin essentially inherits the same stats as the player. Any stats that the player has will apply to the Dragonkin. For example, if a player's damage is very high currently, then the Dragonkin's damage will be very high as well. The only stat that doesn't really translate to a sentient is attack radius. And by default, the Dragonkin has an extremely high attack radius. So you will know that this Dragonkin will be a very, very expensive sentient to buy. Now we move on to the Fire Mage. The Fire Mage casts a flame that bursts into an area of flames if the hit lands, damaging any enemies in it, lasting for quite a bit until the flames eventually go out. Up next is the Soul Drainer. The Soul Drainer shoots a giant, slow, soul-draining spell. Any enemies that are in the projectile will take damage over time. This next sentient looks pretty normal at first, but actually has a pretty useful ability. The Retaliator. The Retaliator is a sentient that, when they are attacked, they shoot back the exact same projectile they are attacked with at the enemy that was attacking them. This retaliation projectile does twice the amount of damage though. Otherwise, it acts pretty normal, similar to an archer. Up next is the Arbalist. The Arbalist shoots a penetrative projectile that goes through multiple enemies. Other than that, it has pretty normal stats all around. Next up is the Ballista. It can pretty much be described as an upgraded version of the Arbalist. Its projectiles are more penetrative and deal way more damage. However, it is quite a large sentient, taking up quite a lot of important room on the battlefield. Finally, last but not least, we have the Paladin. The Paladin is pretty much a counter to the Tinker, and how the Paladin counters the Tinker is that it smites any enemies as well as any evil sentients in range. The Paladin prioritizes the evil sentients, of course. This sentient is pretty much the only sentient that has a slight variation whenever the Tinker touches them with their evil aura. The Paladin turns evil for a short time, but then it returns to normal, getting back to killing enemies and evil sentients. So those are all the sentients that are going to be in the game. Hopefully some of them got you excited. However, we are still not done, as I have traps to present to you. There are a total of 5 traps, a small amount compared to the sentients or enemies, but it is still a great amount in the end. First up on our list is the Barricade. The Barricade, even though it's not really a trap, quote unquote, that's just the section it was classified under. The Barricade is intended to block off any enemies and slow them down, with the familiar an exception. The Barricade is also unaffected by the Tinker, so this is a great tool if you are being overwhelmed by enemies on one side of the battlefield. Next is the Magic Mine. The Magic Mine is pretty straightforward. When it's stepped on, it explodes in a magic way, dealing a high amount of damage to any enemies in the blast radius. The next trap we got on our list is the Stone of Fatigue. The Stone of Fatigue has an area that will activate its effects, and the effects in question is that the stone casts an area that slows down enemies in its radius. And it will continue casting this spell until all the enemies are out of its radius. Next, we got the Spike Trap. The Spike Trap is a square area that, when stepped on by any enemy, will have spikes pop up, continuously damaging any enemies in its area. And then, last on our list is the Fire Rune Trap. The Fire Rune Trap is a trap that, when stepped upon, will set an enemy on fire, and then goes on cooldown for a bit, recharging until it sets an enemy on fire if it is in its radius. And before we get to the outro of this video, I just want to do a quick plug for my Patreon. And there you can find posts on details of the game, what I plan to implement in the game, etc., etc. And you can find that link in the description below. Alas, we arrive at the end. Those are all the characters that have been implemented in the game. Hopefully, some of them have caught your interest to the point where you want to play the game. But now, we must wrap up this devlog. So if you made it this far, thank you for watching this devlog. And just to reiterate on the bad news, unfortunately the devlogs will be a lot more infrequent now that I have a job. But hopefully I can get some chances to work on my game. But for now, I'll see you, viewer, in the next major update of this game.